What's up, guys?
Hello.
We're back for another installment of Bright Lights Beyond.
The grave.
How is everyone doing? How is everyone liking the new angle that we're going with?
We kind of felt like it was a necessary transition because obviously we're going to die. So let's go there
Let's
now.
get it. Yeah. Let's figure out what happens when we die. So,
Because we have all the answers. Just so you know, if you're tuning in, you're getting a special sneak peek
at death.
at death.
And you're welcome for it.
Yeah.
Certainly. So, this week we kind of wanted to talk about death, but not just death and dying in general. We wanted to talk about like what really happens to your body when you die. Now, I know it may seem more interesting to learn about what happens to your soul, but you'll be happy to know that they are one and the same, because what happens to your body can also happen to your soul. There's not an exact science as to like what actually happens to your soul when you die, but looking at near-death experiences and shared-death experience kind of gives you a good sense of what could happen to your soul. But we wanted to look at what happens to your body and what different cultures do with your body and how they honor you and how your body takes that next step into the afterlife.
I think it's kind of interesting that we care about the soul when people are alive and we care about the body when people die. So it almost feels like the body becomes more special to us when we die. Because we have these practices, because that's what we have left of the person. We have to find ways to honor them and their memory and their spirit, but we also physically have a body now that every culture, regardless of what you believe, we're humans. We got bodies. So you have to figure out what to do with them. And I think it's so interesting that each culture has something so drastically different ways to honor them.
I agree. You know, that's something that I hadn't really thought about in terms of living life. We are not necessarily always concerned about like our physical body. I think a lot of people, especially nowadays, are like detached from their physical body. But when we die, it becomes so important. There are cultures where it's like you can't even reach heaven or nirvana without like the proper burial. So it becomes so important to us, which is, you know, almost like adverse. Wouldn't you care more about like what's not here anymore? So you're like your soul, but your body is also really important. And through research that we've done that we're going to share with you guys, we really get to see like what different cultures and how they honor the body and like the physical people and also the soul at the same time, because like I said, it's very symbiotic.
There are death rituals that are kind of universally known because in a lot of ways they feel very extreme, but they kind of fit in that very ritualistic, like you said, they go back to this has to happen to the body in order for your soul to go elsewhere. So an example would be mummies.
Exactly. Mummies are something that we're taught from an early age. And we're almost taught that Egyptians are like obsessed with death, when in actuality, they weren't really obsessed with death. They feared it so much that they had to rationalize what would happen to your physical body and your soul. So they created something like mummification.
And it's interesting that we focus so much on the Egyptian burials, but the ancient Chinese rituals included mummification. Pre-Columbian societies of South America, the Canary Islands, and a lot of other cultures incorporate this. But I think the excitement of the uncovering of it through history with the Egyptian, you know, they were buried in the pyramids, and it was very grand. And I think that it made us so aware of their specific rituals.
Absolutely. I think that, especially like in America, we learn a lot about Egyptology. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of the early archaeologists were British, and then, you know, that's kind of how it goes. But we know a lot about that. And a ton of different cultures have done things like mummification. But with what makes Egypt so like cool is that when in looking at this, not only the rich were mummified. I think that obviously when it comes to like, you know, decorated sarcophaguses and like like jars of jade and different like perfumes and such that they had like in these tombs, yes, obviously, but even the poorest person in Egypt was mummified by the sand, because that's how it originally started, is because sand dries out your organs and your, you know, the liquid that's inside of you, and that's basically what the mummification process is. The more I research like these death rituals and like what we do with the physical body, the more I realize All like a lot of these cultures are the same in the way they do it. Like for example, with mummification, they say that there was 3 reasons why the ancient Egyptians did it. One was because they feared death, and they thought that the only way to kind of get to where you need to be is to have a host, and so that was your mummified body. So when you got to the other land, the heaven part, you'd have to have a host. So it was fear of death was one of the reasons why they did it. The other reason why is because everyone wanted to be like Osiris, and he was the Egyptians' first kind of god that died and then came back to life. His wife Iris, with help with a lot of other gods, brought him back to life, and so that is just like Jesus in the Judeo-Christian culture, it is coming back to life. And so to be like him, you had to be mummified. And then the last reason was to buy more time, because this mummification process lasts upward of 70 days. And it gives the time for the family to grieve and get together in terms of like the money, the burial. So it was like a buying of time to respect the dead. So those are like the 3 reasons that Egyptologists believe that mummification really became super popular and continued throughout all of ancient Egypt.
I like that practice because I feel like in our culture in the US and in many places now, you have basically 2 options. You're either cremated, which happens right away. And so when you have a funeral, it is not a physical body basically. Or you have the funeral within like the next week and you're embalmed, and it's not even technically a representation of that person's body when they were alive. It's like a kind of picture version of it or a filtered version of it, which is great, and it's a way to honor the dead, and it's a way that we've been doing it for quite a while. But it is interesting taking like the nature aspect of it and having it be kind of a process over time where you get to grieve with the body's decomposition as well, or lack of, when mummification actually happens.
I totally agree with you.
There's another ritual that I absolutely love, and it's kind of more of a celebration, and it's called the parade, and it's in the Varanasi, India culture. And they say that it is a parade for the dead through the streets. The body is dressed in colors that highlight the virtues of the deceased: red for purity, yellow for knowledge, other things that kind of represent the color aspects of who that person was. The effort is to encourage the soul to reach salvation, ending the cycle of reincarnation for the body, and they sprinkle it in the Ganges River, and then it is cremated, but it's cremated in a way that it's almost kind of like a celebration of that life to then move on to the next part. I just think that that's such a positive kind of spin on it.
I love that. That kind of reminds me of the New Orleans jazz funerals. It's a combination of like West African, French, and then African American cultures. And they kind of, originally it was kind of looked down upon because I think in America and maybe some other cultures, death is like very solemn, and you have to like, it is very sad, and we, oh no, she's dead, that kind of stuff. But in this culture, they do like a whole like 10-piece quartet jazz, and they march through the street, and it's a celebration. And I think the celebration of life is like I think it's cool when they call it like, oh, this is her celebration of life, because it's true. It's like, it is sad because you may be not able to see that person anymore in this realm, but you need to celebrate their lives. And that reminds me of like the New Orleans jazz funerals that, they march throughout their parish, and it's just like a celebration for the family and friends of these deceased people.
I also like when it's directly tied to the type of lifestyle that these cultures live in. So in a Nordic culture, they do a lot of like releasing the body in water, because the kind of Nordic Viking thing is they're always on water. It's very much an aquatic.
Yeah, it's like a voyage
people.
Type thing. It's like, a Viking burial. They send them off into their next journey of life.
It's another journey. It's another afterlife journey, and that's really cool. So like there are ways to honor your body after, well, you will not be honoring your body, but there are ways for people
could be watching it,
like, hey, I like this. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's like a Yelp rating. Like this my funeral was 2 out of 5. But yeah, there are ways that I think you can honor that kind of are, just cool and interesting. And it's cool that we have all of these things all around the world, and everybody just kind of like picks one that fits what they need or where they live.
That kind of reminds me of like, in terms of burials, like the Tibetan
sky burials. Yeah, those are really cool. So by definition, the sky burial is a common Tibetan tradition amongst Buddhists who believe that the value of sending their loved ones' souls towards heaven. It is in the ritual, bodies are left outside, often cut into pieces for birds and other animals to devour. This serves as a dual purpose of eliminating the now empty vessel of the body and allowing the soul to depart, while also embracing the circle of life and giving sustenance to animals. So it's interesting that it's very specific to birds as like kind of a rise to heaven.
I love that. It reminds me of like when you like a seed. You know how they tell us how like seeds are pollinated, and it's like your body could go through so many different avenues. I just love that. It just reminds me of like pollination, which I mean odd, but I think it's a good analogy.
Yeah. I also think too I like in their tradition that it does feel like you're separating the soul from the body, because like they're
Totally.
like the soul has gone to heaven and their body it now is replenishing the world around it.
So, on the topic of like burials, I looked into practices that the Jewish faith kind of does around death. Their focus is to respect the body and then also comfort the family, which I think are pretty much the two main things that you need to hit when you're talking about someone who's passed recently, is to make sure that the family is comforted and then also that the body is preserved and taken care of. So, in the Jewish culture, there are things called Shemira. And it is a practice of never leaving the body alone. So a lot of different funeral homes who accommodate this practice will have people who come in and they'll pray right next to the body, which means that the body is protected with their prayers, which is super cool. And so the body is never alone. And a lot of people who originally do this are a little nervous, but once they do this, they have like a total different appreciation of life and death. On top of that, there are people who are called the Holy Burial Society, and they go through a process called tahara, which is a purification process. So they clean the body, they cleanse it, and they wrap it in like what the priestess would wear back in the day. Like this process also is to comfort and to really be reverent. And it's the same kind of thing as the people who are praying over the bodies. They have this sense of like new appreciation of life, and they normally see the world differently. After that, they're buried, obviously, just like, you know, any other person is. But those two practices I found were really like compelling and touching, that they have people dedicated in this faith to really taking care of this body and comforting the family. And it's customary for them not to speak about what they've seen in those rooms to the family. They're just there to kind of, you know, they go to the wake or they go to the funeral, and the family members actually know who they are, and they feel this immense amount of reverence and love towards these people who have helped their family members kind of cross over and taking care of their bodies. It's just so reverent, and that's so beautiful that people do that for others.
I wish that was kind of incorporated more, because I mean, like personally, when I lost Butler, you almost feel really vulnerable leaving them alone.
I absolutely agree. And that's why those family members are so appreciative, and you're physically there to help those people that you love cross over. And there's like no greater appreciation or love you can have for somebody or something than to just be with them. So yeah.
Right. And like they say in Pippin, the one perfect thing you can do in life, the only thing we do perfect is die. But we all die alone. So it's nice that there's this kind of like, not a shaman, but somebody,
No, yes.
but somebody that can be there and comfort those who are alive and those who have passed.
Absolutely. That's why, like, when I learned about this, I was just honestly taken back, and I was like, wow, that is just so cool, because death is the great equalizer. No matter how fat, skinny, ugly, beautiful, rich, poor, everybody's gonna die.
Yeah.
And it's just so beautiful to have somebody there. And I also think that's why destigmatizing death is like so important, because it's like, you guys, it's going to happen. And I would just want to comfort somebody, or people, you know, think about it in a different way, because it shouldn't be this like, yes, it is morose and sad, but like it shouldn't be this like terrible, terrible feeling. Like there is joy to be had after.
Well, that's why I think some of the best funerals are where they're telling like stories, and you feel like, whether they're cremated or they're embalmed or just, you know, in a casket, the person is in the room. You don't necessarily have to see them, but it almost feels like you have like a reunion of sorts, and the person is there, and you're like, oh, we're kind of just, you know, we're celebrating.
And that kind of brings me into a couple traditions I think are super cool. So even after we're buried, there are like celebrations of life to be had for years to come after that person's gone, not just the funeral.
So you must be talking about the dancing with the dead ritual, right?
That is, yes, I am talking about
That's
that.
literally the one. Okay, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, so I apologize in advance. It's called the Famadihana, and it is a Madagascar burial tradition. What they do is basically people open the tomb of their dead every few years and rewrap them in fresh burial clothes. Each time the dead get fresh wrappings, they also get a fresh dance near the tomb while music is playing all around them. This ritual translates as turning of the bones, which is meant to speed up decomposition and push the spirit of the dead towards the afterlife. So they're basically like, okay, let's wake you up, let's shake you up, let's go.
That is so cool. I was looking into that, and they also said like it's not just a way for you to like help the decomposition process, but it's a way for family members to get together and to dance and have fun and see each other years after this person dies. And I think that's so freaking cool.
I also love that it's like incorporating that person into your life still. So like it's maybe you're not going to think about them every day, maybe you're not going to visit their grave every day, but if you have it in your schedule to go every few years and do this, they're a part of your life still.
Absolutely. And I think that that's so special because it keeps you there. And sometimes it's easy to forget, or sometimes like, oh, I don't want to think about it. But when you have like an actual like an activity to do, or like family's going to be there, or like, you're going to dance with somebody, like that's just so cool.
And like down to the like physical element of this, I am so curious how they feel as they visit the person, because obviously every time they go, there's probably some kind of decomposition that's happened.
Right.
They probably look different every time. So I wonder if that helps people who are alive have a little bit more closure with death, because they see the process as it's happening through the years of it happening. So it's almost kind of like a sneak peek at what you're going to have experienced to you, because a lot of times we don't get that.
Exactly.
They go in the ground and then it's done.
I think that's part of what makes it so scary and mythical, because like we don't, maybe like we've blocked it out of our mind, or like society's been like, oh no, like we can't see that anymore, but we don't really know. Like I couldn't tell you what it really looks like, but like when people are around that, it maybe takes away the kind of power death has over us if we can see what actually happens into our physical body.
Right, and we have some form of control over it because we're able to like rewrap them in fresh cloth, and we're helping you continuing to like be on your afterlife journey.
That also kind of reminds me of, so I grew up in Texas, which is down south, you guys. If you don't know geography, it's down south.
Is it?
And yeah. Yeah, girl. And it's very close to Mexico. And in Mexico, there's a tradition called Dia de los Muertos, and that means the Day of the Dead. It happens on the Catholic holiday of All Souls Day, which is one of the reasons why it's tied together. So Dia de los Muertos, it combines Aztec culture and then also Catholicism. So it's really a celebration of the deceased family members. A lot of times they'll have things called ofrendas, which are altars that they'll sometimes have in their house or outside, and it'll be decorated with like, pictures of the dead and food that they loved, games they loved to play, drinks and flowers and these sugar skulls or calaveras, and it is just a way for people to honor the dead. They also will go to the grave sites and they'll clean up the grave around them, and they'll also bring, food and offerings to the grave site as well. It's like its own ofrenda, and it's basically a way for family members to honor their deceased loved ones. It's also said that in that practice, they come alive and they celebrate with you, which is literally so cool. It reminds me of, you already know, our favorite movie.
Is it Coco?
It's Coco. It's Coco, girl.
And so if you haven't seen Coco, it will mess you up for hours afterwards. Everyone is a mess watching that movie. But the thing that they talk about in that movie is that it's basically them coming back over the bridge to death to kind of meet their loved ones.
And just to hang out for a day. Like, how cool would that be? And what's so cool about Day of the Dead is that it's a national holiday in Mexico. Like, how cool is it that they have an entire day, they have celebrations, they have all these amazing things just to celebrate the dead. Like, that is the best way to honor people, I believe,
Yeah. And it's funny to kind of circle back to the beginning. The mummification was for the person, but I think these practices become for both. It's so much for the person who's died, but it's for the person who's alive too.
Absolutely. And I think that is the perfect way to kind of end this, because I think that it's both. it's both. It's the respect, just like in the Jewish culture, it's the respect for the family and the body, but then also to comfort the people still here. And I think that is so cool.
Yeah. And it's funny when we're talking about death now, we almost kind of talk in the same way as the, Bright Lights Beyond season 1 of near-death experiences, because that is, kind of teetering that line. And so this is also teetering the line, because it being for both the living and the dead, you're kind of always in that little middle ground of like, we're trying to mesh these two together to be okay with them.
And I think that that's what comes along when you talk about topics that are so unknown, like when you have the unknown, you have so many different elements, but I think that there is a middle ground and a line that you straddle. And I think it's just great to look at both sides of the line. And that's what I think was so cool about learning about these. And I hope you guys learned a little something about different cultures and like how burials and traditions and celebration of life and all these things that happen during and then years after really make a difference and really help these people move on and live their life, whether the loved one is gone or, still here.
Yeah. I think it's also worth it, if you're interested in this, to Google these rituals, because obviously we did a quick overview of a lot of them, very much broad, survey of them. But if you look really in depth, a lot of them have evolved over the years, and it's really interesting to see how they've evolved over time. Obviously, in our country, in the U.S., it's evolved quite a bit, and in our practices we've kind of like figured out a thing that works, and so these other cultures have figured out things that worked, and it's created a lot of peace for people.
Absolutely. So
it's hard to talk about death.
Yeah. And I think that this episode was really the heavy hitter in terms of death. The next ones will be a little bit more mystical, as in like, the spirit realm. But the physical part of death is something that definitely needs to be talked about. And I'm so glad that we got to do it respectfully and with you guys. And if you have any questions or anything like that, please interact with us on our website, Instagram, anything. And we're just so thankful that you guys are here.
Yeah. And if you have any practices that like we haven't talked about that you're like, oh my gosh, this is something that my family does that I absolutely love. These are things that we're all trying to finesse. Nobody knows how to exactly celebrate death in a 100% happy way, but it's always worth it to try and find new little rituals and things that like bring a positive spin on it. So if you have anything, just like comment on one of our things and just tell us what some of your afterlife traditions are with people that you love.
Would love to learn about that.
So thanks again for joining us. We love you all, and we're really kind of enjoying this new era. We've hit this kind of like, we're back in the unknown.
We're back. And remember, guys, live life beyond.